Well, the High Court decision setting aside the decision to grant Grace Mugabe diplomatic immunity has been widely welcomed. The Gender Commission says the judgment is proof that gender-based violence needs serious and a united response by law enforcement authorities. Now, while the DA has hailed it as a victory for ordinary South Africans, the former Zimbabwean First Lady is accused of assaulting a South African model, Gabriella Ingalls, at a Sandton hotel last year. She was allowed to fly out of the country after being granted immunity by the Department of International Relations. Yesterday's judgment could see her being brought back to South Africa to face the charges leveled against her.
All right, and for more on this, we are joined in the studio by constitutional law expert Dr. Dial Ndima. He'll be talking to us then about that decision to grant Grace Mugabe diplomatic immunity being, in essence, recalled. Dr. Dial, thank you so very much for joining us here on Afro Breakfast. All right, so in your view, this decision, the fact that this decision has sort of been declared an error of law, as the court said yesterday. What do you make of that judgment by the South Gauteng High Court? What do they mean by that it was an error of law to grant Grace Mugabe diplomatic immunity? In what sense? In what legal sense?
Yeah. Public officials, like ministers and presidents, they act in terms of the powers they have, in terms of the law. But in a constitutional state like South Africa, there is rule of law, which means then that the powers that you have, you must exercise them according to the instrument that gives the power. You are not going, because you have got the power in terms of law to do something, you are not going to neglect the rules for doing it. In a constitutional state, you act only as allowed by law and the Constitution. That is the context of the judgment.
Now, let me just take perhaps a step back. Perhaps this is where I should have started then. What exactly is understood then by diplomatic immunity? I mean, I know growing up we'd see these vehicles on the road, and, you know, if we knew it was a diplomat's car, we knew that these people could never get into trouble. We even heard, you know, people saying even if, you know, this vehicle knocks someone over the road, it doesn't matter, they will get away with it. But what actually is meant by diplomatic immunity, and who, in actual fact, gets that honor or privilege of enjoying it? Because we had understood that it covers not just the diplomat himself, but his family that is present, you know, in the country.
Of course, diplomats are representing their countries, yes, in our country. Therefore, like the ambassador, for example, who stays most of the time permanently, he or she represents the head of state which sent him. Therefore, he enjoys those privileges that his or her head of state would enjoy if he or she were to come to South Africa on his own. Therefore, the diplomatic immunity relates then to that immunity that is given to the diplomat as representative of the head of state from which he comes.
You know, I have a two-pronged question next. Firstly, what does this mean for the former First Lady? Does this necessarily mean that she will be extradited? And then on the back of that question, would South Africa want to, in fact, find itself in this, you know, sort of sticky diplomatic situation of telling, you know, the former president, Robert Mugabe, that his wife must come back to face these charges?
When the decision to grant her immunity has been declared unlawful, then the next step then would be to try to, because the court would require the state to then institute the proceedings, because she was not prosecuted only because there was immunity.
Right.
Now that there is no immunity, the state now must act to secure her presence in South Africa. They may institute extradition proceedings in Zimbabwe for her to be brought to South Africa.
Now, in terms of, you know, I suppose one would call it recourse that would then be available to the former First Lady, what legal path, and I suppose I'm asking you to, you know, pretend for a while that you're her legal team, what route would should we expect her to now take, whether it be appealing, or what can she do legally in the situation that she now finds herself in? The fact that that rule that she had relied on is no longer applicable, what now happens?
Yeah, she is not involved in the case herself, and the case is actually against the South African Minister of International Relations. And I'm sure they did not like, in government, they did not like the idea of pursuing her because exactly of what we are saying.
But it's still involved, so will she not have to come back to answer then to the charges, no? Will she not have to answer to those charges against her, no? If the state is found to have breached the law, will she not then, as a consequence of that, not have to then come back to answer to those charges against her?
Yeah, that is what the position is at the moment.
Yeah.
She is required now to, she is required now to come and face the charges. And normally then people don't come.
Now, diplomatically, what would that mean for relations? I mean, you know, Robert Mugabe is no longer the president of Zimbabwe, so I suppose that influence and power that he once had is no longer, you know, one that we can speak of. But still, though, what does it mean, though, for the relations, really, for South Africa and Zimbabwe in terms of, when we're talking about international relations in this particular context?
Yeah, Zimbabwe is a sovereign state, is a foreign state. It doesn't matter that Robert Mugabe is no longer the president.
Yes.
What we are talking about happened when he was. Therefore, Zimbabwe, regardless of who the president is, Zimbabwe would like to be respected in the sense that their first lady should not be treated like an ordinary criminal in South Africa. Therefore, Zimbabwe will actually be interested in the case as well, regardless of whether Mugabe is not a president.
Let's go back then to that question. I mean, you'd said that it is actually the Department of International Relations in this case that has been found wanting. The then Minister Maite Mashabane we could then say that she erred in this particular instance. So what happens next? What does the then Minister, Maite Mashabane, now do moving forward now?
Yeah, it depends on what the South African government thinks about this court case.
Yeah.
Because if they still believe that they were correct in their actions, they may appeal the judgment.
All right.